My name is James E. Millett, Jr. I was born in South Portland, Maine, and graduated from high school there in 1941. The day the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, I was actually at home with my mother and father preparing to go out that Sunday afternoon on a church play that I was involved in at the time. So my father was a veteran of World War I. He ended up in Verdun at the end of the war. So he's always been, of course, very much in favor of the military. So, of course, there was immediately a little difference as far as my mother was concerned, see. But, I did not enlist immediately. I had just gotten out of high school, so I looked for different jobs, and there wasn't much around at that time. I first went to work in a stock and bond company, and I was a board boy that crawled up on and wrote the number on the board. And I was not too thrilled with that job, but in the same building, the retail credit company was there. So I just went up another floor and went to work for retail credit company. During all this time, shipyards were being built in my hometown in South Portland, Maine. And they started to produce Liberty ships. One of the shipyards was a basin style, if anyone's familiar with a basin style, where actually it's below sea level. And there are large gates. And so, of course, when the ship is ready to be floated, why, they pump the water in there and just drag it out to what they called an outfitting pier. There were also the ones with the ways, where they were built and slid down the ways into the water. I worked in the one that had the basins. It was very difficult, working with 100-foot of hose thrown over your shoulder and climbing up staging. And it was a very dangerous place to work. In a very short period of time that I had worked there, maybe 6 months, I'm not sure what it was. In a period of time, I had 2 injuries in that period of time. Once when somebody didn't cover one of the things on the deck, and I stepped down through that and still carry a scar on that. And this arm has a number of scars from hot steel that was on it when we were working down underneath. So anyway, my mother wasn't too thrilled that I was working there either. So, but my dad and I had been talking, and it was just a foregone conclusion that I was going to enlist. And I did choose the Marine Corps, and I enlisted all alone, on my own, in, it was October 15th, 1942, by the time I enlisted in the Marine Corps. So, of course, I went to Parris Island. It was an interesting trip down on the train, because as we came along, they picked up volunteers all along the way. And when we got down to Parris Island, why, of course, we were a trainload of Yankees. And believe me, he made that well known to us too down there. So. But I got through Parris Island with no great problems. Even the fact that I was left-handed and they tried to switch me to right-handed to use the rifle was a very difficult thing, probably one of the most difficult things that I had ever done up to that point in my life. But after Parris Island, they had decided that some were going into the Fleet Marine Force and some were going in the Air Force. Because at about that time, the Navy had gotten, I think it was 270 V-25s from the Army. I think the Army was looking for things that had a longer range that they were using probably in the Atlantic. So they sent us to, some of us, to the Naval Air Technical Training Center, which was in Memphis, Tennessee. And we never got a chance to go out much. We did go out a few weekends while we were there. Two things about it, though, that I do recall, and for some reason, I don't know why I keep this in my mind. But the Navy was great on very large swimming pools. And the reason they used them, in my mind anyway, was that they used to put these cargo nets up in the middle of them. And they used to put these cargo nets up that went like 20, 25, 30 feet up. And they would put life preservers on us, life jackets on us, and we would climb up to the top. Now, there's somebody up here at, is this all right for me to do? There's somebody up here at like 25 feet, and then there's somebody halfway up, and somebody, so they keep them going all the time, and if you get up the top and the guy hasn't jumped, you have to push him off, you know. But jumping that distance into this crazy pool, I mean, needless to say, your arms went right up over your head and that jacket came up right up around your face. So, but they didn't make us do it too many times. But then a really nice thing happened there. A family who had a Marine in the service came in and adopted 3 of us and came to see us on a regular basis, and then said they would come back for our graduation. So they come back for our graduation, but as it happens in the service, as you know, some guys got in some pretty serious trouble the last night before graduation, and they never had the graduation. So from there, we were sent to Mojave, California, Marine Corps Air Station, and the Navy was using it too at the same time. As they completed their flight school, they came over there with the F-4Us and the Hellcats, and they had the Dauntless dive bombers and everything else. We were working on machine guns all the time, and they were coming in, practicing their landing, and sometimes trying to practice in a short distance for their carrier landing. So all of these planes were just trying to get a little experience, and they had some pretty serious problems with some of them on landing because these guys hadn't had too many hours of flight times. But they were getting all of them ready to go overseas. So the best we knew, we worked on with the machine guns and everything, and the best we knew was that we were being trained as gunners for these ships. So anyway, they shipped us to Emirau in California, and which is pretty much of a focal point there for stuff with the Marine Corps. They shipped us there, and they lined us all up one day, and they said, anyone below 5'9", step forward. We stepped forward. And they said, thank you for volunteering to be an aerial gunner, you know. I had never had a drink when I went in the service. And we used to go to these places that were strictly for enlisted personnel. And everybody drank, and I ate a pint of ice cream. And guys used to come in and say, hey, what's this guy doing here, you know, eating a pint of ice cream. About 3 days after we were volunteered as gunners, American Red Cross came and said that they had approved an emergency furlough for me to go home. My mother had a nervous breakdown. So I went home, and when I came back, that squadron, all of those squadrons had gone overseas, and all the guys had been assigned. So I was reassigned, and that's when the Navy got all of the new B-25s. They don't necessarily new B-25s, but that's when they got the 25s. So we formed a squadron out there, and then headed to Cherry Point, North Carolina, to pick up the planes. And then we were in Little River, Peterfield Point in New River, which was very close to there. And we're getting into wintertime too, by the way. And that's why we picked up and trained on the B-25s. And so we trained for a couple of months there, and then they got a whole troop train together for us. Actually, there were two, one carrying all the other stuff, the baggage and everything else. And we went back to El Centro, California. So you go from the desert in Mojave to the Imperial Desert down there, way down on almost on the border of California. So one time we went out and we were just walking around and going to a place to eat at night, and the chief of police in that area was there with his whole crowd, and he was feeling pretty good at the time. He invited us over, and people were very, very nice to us in that area. Oh, the people in California. We stayed in a private home one time, 3 of us guys stayed in a private home. It just so happened that one of the guys that was serving with us there was Shirley Temple's brother. So of course he had a little influence for things for us around there. So I can't remember which order these came in, but I think the first one we went in to see was Orson Welles' Wonder Show in there, which was just an incredible thing, you know, but I don't remember much about it. I have the handbill, I have all of those things that went along with it. So they could only have a certain number of people could go to this, so the problem was they told us there would be another one coming up, and we knew the date. So we wanted to make sure that we got in. We didn't care about anyone else. We wanted to make sure we got in. So what we had to do, we volunteered to swab the floors in the barracks, because we knew the officer of the day came around and put this thing on a board for signatures. So for a few days before we knew that we were going away, while we were there swabbing all the floors and doing all the work. So anyway, now I was back at El Centro. So El Centro is where we left from there to go overseas. We went into San Diego and we left from there. And it was on a 10,000-ton merchant ship that the MS Brastagi, B-R-A-S-T-A-G-I, MS Brastagi. And I think it was a crew out of Rotterdam, I believe, out of Rotterdam. But it was a tough trip over for me because, again, other than being left-handed, I had another problem too. I suffered from motion sickness. So it was not an easy trip over, plus the fact they even made you stand guard on the guns at night too. So being half sick and standing on the gun, we used to stand with our arms like this around the back of the armor plating there, so we wouldn't fall over, you know. But that was a good trip. And when we got over, they knew what the destination was. We didn't know just what it was, but the Seabees were still working on some of the runways for us. And the entire camp for the personnel had not been completed at the time. So we ended up going into New Caledonia. Very beautiful country. Oh my gosh, it was gorgeous there with all those coconut trees and everything. So we actually were kind of waiting there until the other stuff was together. And in the meantime, our flight crews, you know, were coming over a couple at a time, and they all had new engines put on the planes, I believe, before they started any of this. And I can't remember the period of time that we were in Caledonia, but then we another ship took us over to Emirau. The name of the island is Emirau, E-M-I-R-A-U. It was in the Bismarck Archipelago, the St. Matthias group of islands. It was less than 3 degrees off the equator. It was this big. If you get a map, I'll bet 2 out of 3 maps don't have it on there. And as the Marines had progressed through the Pacific, they never tried to clean up everything on every one of these little islands in the Pacific. So the purpose of our B-25 squadrons was to just keep them under control so that they're not fed, or, you know, I don't mean that I don't mean we're trying to starve them to death, but to keep provisions from arriving there anyway. And then we bombed them regularly. They even did what they called heckle hops. They bombed at night so the poor guys couldn't sleep, you know. So we did that from August of 44 till August of 45. And so we all thought we were going to be relieved and come home. And they said there's no way. They said that, and they indicated that something was really happening in the Pacific at that time. We were never told exactly where we were going. And so we came back, we boarded ship, we crossed the equator, we were heading north, and we were perhaps a day out of Mindanao, and that's when the first bomb was dropped. And of course, we didn't know where we were supposed to be going from there, and we didn't really know about any other plans that might have been made by the military at that time. So we went into Malabang on Mindanao, on the southernmost island. And of course, the second bomb was dropped, what, 3 days later, or 3 days later. So all we had to do was, actually, we didn't do much of anything. We were trading with the natives and stuff like that by that time. We never saw any natives on the other island, by the way. Nobody was there. I forgot to say, though, that it was, when we arrived on Emirau, it was under the control of New Zealand. And they were flying fighter planes out of there. And so they were still there, and we were, of course, driving on the other side of the road. So eventually, that was bad enough, but eventually they turned control over to the United States, and we had to switch sides of the road one night there, so, which is kind of tricky, you know. We just didn't have enough information aboard ship, you know. It seemed like an incredibly, I don't know, I can't say that I felt it was the wrong thing to do. And so, actually, we were on this island. I'm just going to let it go at that, okay? And actually, on this island, we stayed until they could get other ships to take us home. In the meantime, we were stripping all the armor plating off, everything. Of course, you know how the military is. I mean, they don't care how much they throw away or destroy or anything. They stripped the planes. They dug monstrous holes with bulldozers. They took all of this stuff. They had these gorgeous flight jackets that they used to have and all of this stuff. They threw it all in the hole. They ran bulldozers over the hole so that it would ground up anything they could grind up. And then they filled in the earth again there like that. I mean, they just so wasteful, you know. But anyway, it made it easier to ferry the planes back to Hawaii from there. I got back in the United States, we got back in the United States on December 1st. That would be 45, December 1st, 1945. And by December 10th, we were out. We were discharged. And of course, they weren't taking anyone as permanent Marines at that time. Excuse me. our enlistments were for finally in the reserve. Otherwise, they would be sitting there with millions of guys still in the service. See, so I went home, and my mother had been put in a home as a result of early illness, and when I got home, my father was the station master at Union Station in Portland, Maine, so he greeted me there. But in the meantime, all the guys in our neighborhood, as they came home, they checked with my dad to find out who was coming in on all the things, so they were there to meet me. And see, it was quite a thing. But I went home to an empty house. 60 years later, I did learn something, and I don't know whether any of you are familiar with it at all. Have you ever heard of Operation Downfall? Before they dropped the bombs, they had been working on a plan to invade Japan, and that's Operation Downfall. I've got a whole thing on it, by the way, if you'd like it. You might be interested in it. But, so after 60 years, we found out what our destination was, you know, and so I am glad they dropped the bomb. We didn't want to stay where we were. We had a wonderful, Yardley, Pennsylvania, it's just a wonderful place. It's directly across the river from Trenton. It's not too far from Princeton. All that research area is up in there, see. But we just wanted to get away, and we wanted to go south. Actually, we had looked at Arizona first. And we actually had a map drawn out to make that trip to Arizona. But so we sold our house, put our furniture in storage, and just got in a car and headed south. And this is one of the places we stopped, you know, in this area here on our way down to Florida, because we were taking 2 or 3 weeks in Florida. And so when we came back, we said, we can't pass this up, we've got to look this over. So we looked all the way from North Carolina, you know, all the way down to Savannah. And as far as we were concerned, we're in Heritage Plantation. And as far as we're concerned, it was just the right place for us. And we still love it. We still love it. We say many times, if we ever left here, what would we do? And we don't know. One thing I didn't mention was the USO show that came into the Pacific. I just see this here. And Jack Benny came with Carol Landis and a USO group. You imagine they traveled that entire area. They did all of those islands there, put on a show in all those places. Actually, she got sick there, and she looked rather thin at the time. And but she didn't die from that. But what she did, I looked her up on the internet, and she was fell in love with some other guy who just were not that enamored with her, even though he went around with her. She committed suicide, which is a crime. Very beautiful girl, a beautiful girl. But it was interesting to see her. Some of the, I don't know, I don't have the pictures of her in front of the plane when all the guys are there when she jumps off the plane. But there is a picture of her in there with Jack Benny, though. So. For some reason, they would what they call skip bomb once in a while. Are you familiar with that? They go in at treetop level with these monster bombs. I mean, I guess they were 1,000 or 2,000 pound bombs, and they would drop these bombs anyway. So you couldn't put one of those up in a bomb bay. So they had designed special racks to hold these just below, and you had to fly with the bomb bay doors open all the time. So the thing is just hanging down under there. It's an interesting thing. In the bomb bay, there's an electrical solenoid. And it has little things on it like this. And it has a place for the shackle, they call it, that holds the bomb to attach to this. So when it's open like this, you know, everything is all locked up. Plus the fact they put a safety wire through. A bomb just doesn't explode on impact. It has a fuse, and these fuses are screwed into the front of it. And a safety wire goes through that so that when the wind hits it, when the plane is moving along, it's an impeller. And when that impeller flies off, then all of the train of detonation is lined up for the explosion. So anyway, as these different pilots and co-pilots and their crew would come down, and they would ask us, every time they'd ask us questions about the plane and everything, and the guy that was in charge of the mechanical part and I in charge of the armor part would go out there and talk to them. So we're out there standing. Anyway, we're all standing there by this bomb, and apparently one of the guys is up in the plane, he releases the bomb and it drops. We're standing there like this. He releases this thing. Somehow he's just throwing switches up, you know, trying to figure out what's going on. So we all look at each other. We run as fast as we can. Where the planes were was scraped out of coral. And all of this was coral over there. And fine-grained coral, you know, was on the runways and everything else. So we all start running to jump over the other side, you know. Well, of course, I mean, I know that, you know, if the bomb was going to go off, it would have gone off then, you know. So we're over there with the two pilots, and as happens in accidents, which is so not uncommon, who comes whipping up in the car there just after a thing? The officer of the day. We had another one too, where someone made a mistake when we were checking out the plane once, and we dropped 18 sticks of thermite under the plane. And there's no fuse on that, there's no nothing on that. And we dropped 18 sticks of thermite on the plane, and I came down out of the cockpit, and there it is right by my feet. So I called my good friend who was working with me. There was two of us who did most of the work. I called him over. I can see his legs, you know, when I'm peeking down under. See, I don't dare come down over the staircase all the way. And I'm peeking, I can see his legs standing over the side. And I yelled at him, "Don, come here." So he come over, and I said, "Put your arms out." And he put his arms out like this, and I put the 18 sticks in his arm, in his arms, and he walked over and sat on the back of the truck, and we drove it up to a bomb disposal area. So, and that was just a stupid thing. What we do is we take all the bombs down. If it's rained for a few days, there's always that danger that something will get into these solenoids and they won't work, and the bombs will just hang up there, see. So this was following something like that. So they take everything down, and then when they do that, then I get up in the cockpit and set a train, like a train of detonation type of things. And I set that so that it'll fire each one after another. So what happened, the guy did not cock one of the 8 racks on the wings, and it skipped over to the bomb bay and dropped this stuff on there. So we were lucky. Oh, we were mighty lucky, I'll tell you that. See, I didn't fly in the plane. I was the ground crew chief. See? But you want to know what it's like in there? That there were two waist guns, and there was a tail gun. And at one time near the end, we had what they call package guns on the side. And near the end of our time out there, we got modified, these are PBJs, we got modified planes, and we had 15 50 caliber machine guns firing firing forward. We had little bulgers on the side. They call them package guns. And we would have 2 of those bulgers on each side. So we had 4 there, and we had so many in the nose. They sealed in the nose, the plexiglass on the nose. All of that got sealed in, and it was just solid guns. So of course, when we had to load these things, fortunately, there wasn't room enough to hold too much in the way of ammunition. But it was a terrible time. We were always belting information. All of the armament on the plane was my responsibility. Loading the plane and the safety of everything was my responsibility. You know. Yeah. So again, we were the ones who went out and talked to the pilots before every flight. I think there was 6. I think pilot, co-pilot, and possibly a navigator, a bombardier, or whatever you want to call him. And then I think there were 2 waist guns and a tail gun. I think that was the crew. I belong to what they call MAG 61. That's Marine Air Group 61. And I do stay in contact with them by the internet. And they do have occasional get-togethers. I have never gone to one of them. It has never worked out for me to go to one of them. But yeah, I do talk to a number of them. The thing that in that respect, the thing that bothers me the most is that I never went back to my hometown and stayed there. So all of those people that meant so much to me at the time, I've totally lost contact with them. And there's an internet site that I do go in on, and somehow they got my name, and they even know the year that I graduated, and they keep telling me that that I should put all my information on the internet, but I've never felt that I wanted to do that. I don't know why. I'm very proud of it. I'm very proud of it. I mean, I came back whole. I'm a lucky guy. And that, of course, just all depends on that assignment and the fact that I think the fact that I ended up with a different assignment because of my mother's illness, I think she saved my life.